Alright, this is the video lecture that goes along with the packet that should have been sent to you through email. This is the first installment of video lecture for Anatomy Physiology 1 with Mrs. Folland. I'm hoping that you guys had a chance to print a hard copy of the packet that I sent to you guys. That way, as we move through the lecture, you can jot down notes and add anything that you feel necessary as we move through each one of the slides. As you guys are watching the video, you will not have a video feed where you can actually see a picture or an image. You should just be able to hear sound. If that's what you are currently seeing, that's fine. Don't try and adjust it. All you should be getting is the sound portion. The beginning of anatomy and physiology, one of the first things that we do is clarify exactly what anatomy and physiology is. A lot of times people will use the two terms in place of each other, and they do have two very independent meanings from one another. The reason that we study anatomy and physiology is there is absolutely nothing in the human body that is there just for show and that does not serve some sort of purpose. We might not fully understand the purpose, but absolutely every single body part that you guys have, there's a reason behind it. And some of them are so easy and basic that we really don't even think about them, even though we see them, we use them every single day of our life. One of the best examples is if you guys take your tongue and touch the roof of your mouth, you'll notice that it has an arch to it. Most people feel this every day, they know it's there, but they really don't give any thought to why it's there or why it's shaped the way that it is. The reason that you guys have that rounded formation to the top of your mouth is actually to help roll food into a ball to prep it for swallowing and moving it on to the next phase of digestion. Likewise, your jaw, both the top and bottom jaw, have a rounded kind of horseshoe formation to them. Again, that is all to roll food, maneuver it into a ball, which makes swallowing much easier. There are a lot of different examples on the body where we have body parts and the shape and the design have a very specific use, and we just don't realize them for what they are. So if you look at the bottom of that first slide, it says structure determines function and function determines structure. It is kind of like the chicken and the egg question. With all the body parts that you guys have, the shape that they take on is directly tied to the job that they have to carry out. And likewise, the job that the body part has to do is going to ultimately determine the shape of that particular body part. When you look at the stomach has two openings, the esophagus coming in, and then where it leaves the stomach and moves into the small intestine. The actual stomach portion is going to be positioned so that it sits below both of those openings, or one opening, one exit, however you want to look at it. And the reason that that stomach sits below those openings is so that when you guys are digesting food, that food is going to be held in that stomach-like pouch, and it is going to go through the entire digestion process, which can take 3 to 4 hours before that food is ready to move on to the small intestine. So by having that pouch sit below those two openings, number one, it's much harder for food to back up into the esophagus and cause problems, and food is not going to easily pass into that small intestine until it is very much ready to move on to that next stage. So again, the design, the shape of your stomach, very specific to the job that it needs to carry out. If you look at the second slide, I have put the definitions of anatomy physiology. And as I mentioned, a lot of people will use the two terms in place of each other. Anatomy actually stems from the word, or has the meaning to cut. And you'll notice that it says Greek, cutting up of. A lot of the terminology that we have in the scientific world does stem from Latin and Greek backgrounds. And the reason for that is there was a time period where there were several cultures that did not want people to learn about the human body. The church would actually scare people by saying that if bad things were happening to you, if you were getting sick, if you had illnesses that were eventually leading to death, that it was because you had done something bad and you were being punished. And they would talk about these bad spirits that were invading your body, and they scared people into trying to lead better lives, to making sure that they were getting to church when they were supposed to, so on and so forth. Not trying to start a religious debate, but it was something that happened in that time period. The fear was that if people started to learn about the human body and they could explain these things that were happening through scientific means, and no longer that bad spirit was invading your body explanation, if that didn't work any longer, they were afraid that they would lose kind of their hold on people. And so it was frowned upon in a lot of cultures for people to try and learn anything about the human body. And in some places it was actually punishable by death. If you were caught examining organs, looking at dead bodies, using cadavers to learn anything about the human body, they would actually put you to death for it. And they would make an example of that person by making it a public death, and all sorts of other things. So the two cultures that really embraced learning about the body and gave their people opportunities to learn as much about the human body as they possibly could did come from those two areas where we see a lot of our medical terminology come from. So the reason that Latin and Greek, those two places are where we get a lot of our medical terms, that is because those are the cultures that really wanted their people to go out and learn more about the human body. So we see that Greek origin indicating that you are cutting something up. And when you talk about anatomy, you're looking at the structure and the form of a particular body part, why it has the shape that it does, and more so where it's positioned in the body. Location is very, very important. You guys have 3 filters in the human body that are going to clean out the blood. And position-wise, if you look at where those 3 filters are, you have the liver, you have the kidneys, and you have the spleen. And they are located right at the midpoint of the body. And the reason for that is if you would get something in your blood that was toxic or causing problems and needed to be cleaned out, by having them centrally located, wherever that toxin gets into the body, it's going to spend the least amount of time in the blood before it hits one of those 3 filters and eventually is cleaned out. So the positioning of those 3 filters, very, very important. You also have your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands sit right on top of your kidneys. They actually look like little hats sitting on top of your kidneys. And their placement is very important because one of the things that they do is in times where you guys feel stressed, the fight or flight response, the adrenal glands are going to dump a hormone into your bloodstream that is going to, for a very short period of time, give you superhuman strength. And so by having them sit right on top of the kidneys, as I mentioned, kidneys are one of the 3 filters of the body. They have access to a lot of blood. So getting that hormone into the bloodstream happens very, very fast, happens very efficiently, and now you've got that adrenaline coursing through your veins, or your blood vessels, I should say, and getting dispersed in a very short period of time. So when we talk about anatomy, we're looking not only at the shape of a particular organ, but we're also looking at the location, where it is in the body. Physiology side of things focuses solely on the job that a body part does and how it does it. So you're really looking at the functionality of an organ or a body part when you talk about physiology, how it works, and the job that it is designed to carry out. The next slide that you have talks about the biological levels of organization. And when you look at this slide, you'll notice that it goes all the way back to the subatomic particles. And generally when people see subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, and things like that, they immediately think chemistry. Chemistry is very much tied to biology. To have a true understanding of your body, how it works, how it accomplishes everything that it carries out, not only in a given day, but throughout your entire lifetime, you do have to have a basic understanding of chemistry. So if chemistry is not your strong point or not one of your favorite subjects, don't worry. We don't go too in depth with it, but we will talk about some of the basics just so you can get that understanding of how the body works, how it interacts with itself and other tissues, organs, so on and so forth. Looking at the subatomic particles, these are the structures that are going to actually make up an atom itself. And you have these 3 particles, 2 of which carry charges to them. The electrons have a negative charge. The protons have a positive charge. And your neutrons are true to their name, and they are neutral. They do not carry a charge whatsoever. You guys know quite a bit about the laws of attraction, even if you really don't think you know much about chemistry. At some point in their lives, most people have played with magnets, and you put the magnets and push them together and they attract one another, or you can flip them so that they have the same charges exposed, and you try and push them next to each other and you can feel them repelling off one another. In the world of chemistry, those charges are very, very important, because if you have a positive and negative, you guys all know that the laws of attraction say opposites attract. So that positive, that negative, they're going to be drawn to each other and going to want to attach and bond together. In your body, when you have positive and negative charges, that same sort of situation is going to happen. So if you need a chemical reaction to be carried out in the body, you're going to put positive charges in the right location, you're going to put negative charges in the right location, and now when they get close enough to each other, they're going to be drawn to one another, and your chemical reaction is going to be carried out. Once you put those 3 particles together, they are going to make up a particular atom. And atoms are going to be determined, you have a variety of different atoms. They are actually going to be determined based on the number of protons that are present. So every time the number of protons changes, the atom that you are dealing with changes as well. So when you talk about the atomic number, if you've ever looked at a periodic table, the atomic number tells you how many protons that particular atom contains. And like I said, when the number of protons changes, then the atom changes as well. When you start putting your atoms together, linking them together so that they can work with one another, that is known as a molecule. Water molecule, H2O, you have 2 hydrogens bonded to an oxygen molecule. Then you move up to macromolecules. The prefix macro obviously indicates that we are talking about something large. So this is larger than a molecule. Typically you're going to have hundreds of parts that are linked together when you get to the macromolecule stage. Molecules are usually 2 to 3, sometimes a few more than that, but usually on the smaller side. Macros, you're talking about hundreds. Then you get into the organelles. Organelles are structures that are found inside your cells. If you guys think about what your organs do for your body, that's what organelles do for a cell. They are all the internal working parts of a cell that are there to carry out all the specific jobs that need to be done for that cell to survive. So your organs work for you on a daily basis to make sure that you're getting oxygen to your cells, you're removing waste products, just absolutely everything that it takes to keep you alive. That is what the organelles do for the cell. And that organ, the prefix portion indicating that they're working structures within your cell, and then the suffix telling you that they are small in nature. When you get organelles working together, and depending on the cell that you're dealing with, and even the organism that you're dealing with, the organelles that you have are going to vary. So there is no set list, here's all the organelles that are in a cell, because depending on what you're talking about, the organelles present will change. So when you get those organelles all working together, now you've got a cell. The cell is the basic unit in biology. It is the smallest unit of life. So once you get to that cell status, this is the first time where you are going to see an independently living structure. And some of your simple organisms can just be one cell big. They can take care of everything that they need within that one cell. And that's why we classify it as being the basic unit of biology. Now, obviously, there are a lot of things out there that have a lot more than just one cell. Our bodies, the human body, you're talking about trillions of cells in order to keep us functioning and working the way that we do. Once you start putting cells together and they start working as a unit, that is going to take you to the tissue level. And when we transition from cells to tissues, you are talking about different types of cells. So from different areas, different types of cells coming together in order to perform a certain function, that would take you to the tissue level. There are 4 different types of tissue. You have epithelial tissue. This is going to be your skin layers, your membranes, things of that nature. You have connective tissue. There are a lot of different varieties of connective tissue, but true to its name, connective tissue is going to be responsible for providing stability, holding body parts together, holding muscles in place, holding bones in place. All the support systems that it takes to get your body held together, I should say, is what the connective tissues are going to do. The third type of tissue that you have is muscle tissue. 3 types of muscles. You have skeletal muscles, which get their name because they are attached to the skeleton. In order to be classified as a skeletal muscle, it does have to come in contact with the bone. You also have smooth muscle. This is going to make up your internal organs. And then you have cardiac muscle as well, which is only found one location in the body, and that is the heart. And then you have nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is found in the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves that go out to all the different parts of your body and allow you guys to pick up sensory information that is internal as well as in the external world around you. Once you start getting tissues working together, and again, it's typically different classifications or different types of tissues coming together, that is going to form an organ. And organs are working body parts. It gives you the example of skin. Some of your internal structures, such as the heart and kidneys, would fall into that organ category. When you get multiple organs working together, now you've got an organ system. And then when those organ systems are all pulling together, you have a fully formed organism. So the next slide that you guys have, I put in the packet just because some people are auditory learners, they have to hear it. Other people are more visual learners, they like to see it. So the prior slide and this slide go hand in hand. This is just the visual representation of those levels that we just talked about. This next slide asks if you can name the organ systems. And the first thing that I would throw out there is if you even know the exact number of organ systems that we have within the human body. The number of organ systems that we have, just kind of giving you a second to think about it, but the number of organ systems that we have in the human body, it actually takes 11 to keep us fully functioning and working. And there are times where an organ system might be having some problems and start to decrease its functioning. And in those cases, the other body systems can kind of take it up a notch and pick up the slack, so to speak. If it happens for too long or if it starts to involve too many structures, then the body will start to shut down. But in some cases, if one organ system is struggling, the others will kind of pick up and help take over. I would like you guys to, without looking in your textbook, attempt to write down as many organ systems as you possibly can. As I mentioned already, there's a total of 11. And when you are trying to name the 11 body systems, if you get stuck, if you just start kind of thinking about the organs that you have on an individual basis, your skin, your muscles, your bones, things like that, it can kind of help to identify those 11 systems. The next slide that you guys have is talking about homeostasis. Homeostasis is your body's ability to maintain a stable internal environment. And the key word there is internal. You guys have several different places in the body where you have to stay within a certain range in order to be able to function properly. So when you think about things like your body temperature being 98.6 degrees, blood pressure 120/80, resting heart rate should be around 70 beats per minute, all those numbers that you guys associate with those areas, those are your set points. That's where you want to be. And through research, they have found that 98.6 degrees or 120/80, those numbers are where your body is able to work at its best. If you start to fluctuate from those numbers, will your body still work? Yes, to a certain degree. It's just not working as well as it possibly could. And when you start to stray from those numbers too far, then you can really start to have some issues. And you have some more fluctuation in some areas than you do in others. For instance, your blood pressure. Blood pressure, they would like to be around 120/80, but those numbers can vary quite a bit, and the person can still be conscious, alert, functioning on a daily basis. Might not be the healthiest, but they can still get through their day-to-day lives. In other cases, when you talk about your body pH level in the human body should be about 7.4. If you start to sway from that 7.4, if you get down to 7.35, and that's a very, very small change, it actually will start having an adverse effect on your body. Likewise, on the other side, 7.45 and above, you're starting to have issues on that side of things. So very, very small amount of change in the body pH is going to have a lot of problems, where in your blood pressure, you can swing 10, 20, 30 points either direction and maybe not even realize that anything is happening within your body. Now, in order to maintain homeostasis and make sure that that internal environment is staying within those parameters, those set points, there has to be a very detailed communication system that allows body parts, especially body parts that are not in direct contact with each other, to have a method to relay information back and forth so that your brain can monitor what's going on in your body and make sure that nothing is fluctuating too far. And if it does start to fluctuate too far, the brain will initiate a series of events to get you back to normal. Now, the first part of maintaining homeostasis is having a variety of receptors throughout the body. Receptors are going to be put in place so that you guys can receive information from not only inside your body, but your external environment around your body as well. And there are all sorts of types of receptors. Receptors are designed so that they can only deal with one type of information. So you have a series of receptors that deal with hot. You have a series of receptors that deal with cold. You have a series for pain, for light, for dark. Pretty much every single category you can think of, there's a receptor in your body that is going to monitor information, sensory information, with that particular receptor. Now, those receptors allow for that sensory information to come into the body, and if it's not posing a threat, if it's not throwing your body off in any way, a lot of times that information is disregarded. But if the information that is being brought in by the receptor triggers some sort of response, basically what happens is the brain will interpret that sensory information coming in, and if it feels like there is a problem or an issue with that information, it will start to determine how it's going to respond to that particular situation. Once the brain has figured out how to respond to the situation at hand, it will then send a message out to the body this is how we're going to deal with this particular situation. And that goes to what's called an effector. You have two types of effectors in the body. Your effectors are either going to be a muscle or they're going to be an endocrine gland. So you're walking around barefoot, you step on a sharp nail. The receptors are going to pick up that sensory information, that sharp nail starting to pierce your skin. The pain receptors are going to fire. They're going to send a message up to your brain that something painful is happening to your foot, and your brain is going to now figure out a response for that particular situation. It's going to decide that you need to pick your foot back up, so it will send a message out to your muscles in your leg, have them contract, which will pull your foot back and away from that sharp nail that you're stepping on. Another example would be if you are in an embarrassing situation, your sensory information or your receptors will interpret that embarrassing situation. They send a message to the brain that you are being pushed out of your comfort zone. The brain is then going to respond to that, and in this case it will send a hormone via your endocrine glands to your body that will cause your heart rate to increase, will cause your blood vessels to dilate, and now all of a sudden those dilated blood vessels are close to the surface of your skin and you are blushing. So in some cases it will be a muscle response, stepping on something sharp. In other cases, when you get embarrassed and your skin color changes to indicate that you're embarrassed, that would be an endocrine gland carrying out the response from the brain. But the entire goal of homeostasis is to make sure that you are staying within those parameters that are predetermined to be the normal range. Now, with the communication system that you have to maintain homeostasis, there are two types of feedback. You can have negative feedback, or you can have what is known as positive feedback. In a negative feedback system, what actually happens is you have your set point. Let's say it's 98.6 degrees. And all of a sudden, a bacteria invades your body, and your body responds by attacking the bacteria. And in working hard to eliminate that bacteria from your body, it's producing excess heat, and you start running a temperature. And now you have moved from 98.6 degrees to 102.4. Now, the set point is 98.6. That's where we want to be. You're going to have a spike in your temperature, and that elevated body temperature is now going to get relayed to the brain. The brain's going to realize the fact that body temperature is increasing, and it has to do something to change that body temperature. So now the brain is going to set in to affect a series of events that your body is going to work to try and lower your body temperature back down to 98.6 degrees. So start at 98.6, spiked up to 102.4. When your body temperature starts to drop back down, so from 102, let's say it starts to go back down to 101, then 100, and eventually you get back to that 98.6 degrees. Because the number was decreasing, it was getting lower, it was returning back down to normal, that is where we get the term negative feedback loop. So the deviation from your set point, from where you want to be, when it starts to decrease, that is known as a negative feedback loop or a negative feedback summary. On the other hand, you can have a positive feedback summary. And in this case, what happens is you have your set point where you want to be, and the body is actually going to work in this case to continue to increase or move away from that set point. Because in this case, the desired effect is going to call for the body to continue to move away from your normal range. Best example for this one is child labor. So on a normal typical day, most people do not have labor contractions. So that would be your set point, no labor contractions. At the end of a pregnancy, when it's time to deliver baby, the labor contractions are going to start. They usually start out pretty low key. And as those labor contractions start to intensify, the goal is to get baby out. So as long as baby is still present, those contractions will continue to increase, get closer together in an effort to get baby out of mom. So as those labor contractions increase, we're moving further and further away from normal. They're becoming more intense. And because you continue to see an increase in our deviation, and we continue to move away from that normal set point, that is known as a positive feedback summary. So if we're decreasing how far we were from set point, that's negative. If we are increasing how far we're getting away from our set point, that is positive feedback. If you just think about positive and negative numbers, should make sense, hopefully. Now, the next slide gets into the body organization. The body is classified into different cavities, and the reason that we have this organization into cavities is so that it's a quick reference point. If somebody says we're in this particular cavity or there's an injury in this cavity of the body, for most people that deal with that sort of thing on a daily basis, they immediately know the potential for any organs or structures that could be damaged because of that injury. So that's one of the reasons that we classify it into different categories, is just to kind of very quickly identify all the potential parts that could be impacted by that injury, illness, whatever the case might be. Now, you do have major and minor cavities. We are going to focus on the major cavities that you guys have, and there are 5. A lot of resources will they will put together the abdominal and the pelvic, and you get the abdominal pelvic cavity. But for our purposes, we are going to keep them separate, and when we talk about the major cavities of the body, we will be talking about the 5 major cavities. First one is the cranial, and that is going to contain the brain, and that is the only structure that you have within the cranial cavity. Makes it pretty easy. You also have the vertebral canal. This is going to have the spinal cord, again, the only structure that you see within the vertebral cavity. The third one is the thoracic cavity, and thoracic is a fancy way of saying chest. So within that thoracic cavity, if you guys think about the structures that you have within your chest, you're looking at the heart, the lungs. You also have a portion You also have a portion of the esophagus. You have the trachea, the thymus gland, and then you also have a structure known as the mediastinum. That is a portion that is going to divide the right and left lung into kind of different compartments within the chest cavity. The next one that you have is the abdominal cavity. Most people would refer to this as their stomach, so you do see the stomach here, as well as the liver, the spleen, the gallbladder, and both the small and large intestine. And then the last one that you have is is the pelvic cavity. This is where you would find the bladder as well as your reproductive organs. At the very bottom of the page, there's a little note with an asterisk. The kidneys, adrenal glands, pancreas, ureters, and the ureters are the tubes that take urine from the kidneys down to the bladder, are actually not located in the abdominal pelvic cavity, but they are tucked in behind that particular area. So they get a special term, which is retroperitoneal. And the retro tells you that they are on the backside or they are behind something else. So they are not truly classified as being in one of the 5 cavities, although I've seen where there have been textbooks and resources that have gone ahead and put the kidneys, adrenal glands, pancreas into the abdominal cavity. Again, if you are kind of a visual type learner, the next slide is for you. This is a breakdown of where the cavities are, kind of the beginning and ending points for them. If you look at this in your textbook or in your workbook, I believe you have an image of this in both places. It's in color and it kind of sets it apart a little bit better. On the packet, when you print it off, it's going to come off different shades of gray, and it doesn't really help, or doesn't go as far to help. I think the color does a lot better job, just kind of sectioning so that you guys can see where one cavity begins and another one ends. But like I said, this is for the visual learners, just kind of putting the verbal information into a different form. The next section that we need to talk about gets into membranes. And membranes are very important structures within the human body because even though they're thin in nature and you typically can see through them, they have a very important role. The membranes are going to be responsible for lining open areas of the body. So your digestive tract, a large portion of your respiratory tract, you're going to have these membranes that are going to line those areas. And some of the jobs that they'll carry out, number one, in some places you have membranes so that you actually can enclose a particular organ. And the reason that it is important to have these layers around the organs themselves is because if a particular organ would get an infection, or you would have an invasion of a virus or something like that, the membrane layer will help to slow down the spread of that infection. If you guys think about how your body is put together, your organs come in contact with each other. There's no space, there's no gaps in between the organs. They are all tucked in there, all touching one another. And so by having this membrane structure, it puts a layer around your organs and just helps slow down the process of any infection going from one organ easily over to another. It's not foolproof, it still can happen, but it just decreases the likelihood that it's going to happen. The other big thing that we have with membranes is that membranes are going to help hold fluid in and around your organs, especially those organs where you have movement. If you guys think about your heart and your lungs, your heart's beating 70 beats per minute, around there, every day of your life. And your lungs are constantly taking in air and getting rid of air, so they're expanding, contracting, they're moving all the time. You have these two moving structures that are in constant contact with each other because the lungs just kind of wrap around either side of the heart. And so by having these membranes, it holds a serous fluid to the organ so that as you have all those organs moving up against each other, you don't run the risk of getting any sort of irritation or any blistering on the surface of your organs. Now, depending on where you're at in the body, the membranes do get some special terminology just so you can place exactly where the membranes are. The first two terms that I want to talk about are visceral and parietal. Visceral is a term that indicates organ. So when you talk about a visceral membrane, this is going to be a membrane that comes in contact with the organ itself. So it's going to be a sac that is right around the organ. The parietal membrane, on the other hand, parietal actually is a term that means wall. That is its literal meaning. And you'll see parietal in a lot of different things as we move through the different systems of the different body systems. But parietal is going to line the entire cavity. So just the outer surface of the entire cavity. Visceral, the organ itself. Parietal goes around the entire cavity. So cranial cavity, vertebral cavity, it just depends on which one you're in. Now, beyond that, we have some special terminology that we use so that people can identify exactly what organ the membrane is surrounding. So for the lungs, the term that you have here is pleural. If you say visceral pleura, this is the membrane layer that is going to be around the lungs themselves. And if you talk about the parietal pleura, this is going to be the membrane that lines the cavity, that thoracic cavity where you find the lungs. Now, you'll notice it talks about the serous fluid. The serous fluid is going to be that material that is going to be between the organ and the sac that's around it. It's a very small amount of space. So, I mean, you're not talking about a huge membrane layer around the organ where you have a lot of fluid built up around it. It's very, very small space, very little amount of fluid. It's just enough to make sure that it reduces friction. So again, as the heart's beating, as the lungs are moving, they're not causing any irritation. The next one that you have is the heart. And in the case of the heart, we use the term pericardium. So for the visceral pericardium, this is going to be the sac that is going to be around the heart itself. The parietal pericardium is going to line the cavity in which you find the heart. And we talked about that mediastinum. That kind of creates a compartment type situation within the chest cavity. So you do have some of those other compartments to line as well. It's not just the entire thoracic cavity. And that's why you see a different parietal membrane in this particular setup, even though the lungs and the heart are all in the thoracic cavity. The last one that we have in the area of the abdominal organs, you have the peritoneum. So visceral peritoneum is going to be around the organ structures themselves, and the parietal peritoneum is going to line the abdominal cavity. Again, we see that serous fluid that is going to be located between the organ and the visceral peritoneum. The next slide gets into anatomical terminology. And with the anatomical terminology, it's very important that you guys can reference places in the body, things in the body, using as few words as possible, especially for those people that are going to be working in areas where you have high stress situations, where you have emergency situations. You can't spend a lot of time describing what you're talking about. You have to be able to very precisely say a word or two words and have everybody in the room or everybody involved with that situation know exactly what you are talking about. So anatomical terminology is just one of those ways where in a word you can be very specific about the location of something. In this particular case, it talks about anatomical position. Anatomical position means that you are standing upright, you are facing forward, your arms are going to be down by your sides, and the hands are going to be turned so that if somebody was standing in front of you, they would be able to see the palms of your hands. So upright, facing forward, arms down by your side, and hands turned with the thumbs out so that someone standing in front of you would be able to actually see the palms. The directional or position terms that you guys have, the first one is superior. Superior indicates that you are positioned above or on top of another structure. And you'll notice right across from it, it has its partner term. Science, especially anatomy, is very big about this. If you have a right, you have a left. If you have a black, you have a white. There are so many things in anatomy that have partners. If one means one thing, you have something else that means the opposite. So superior, we have above. Inferior references something that is positioned below or under another structure. Anterior is going to indicate front. Posterior is going to indicate back. Typically when we talk about anterior, for some reason people kind of think stomach, and posterior, people kind of think the gluteus maximus. You have two other terms that mean the same as anterior and posterior, ventral and dorsal. Ventral also indicates the front side, and dorsal is going to indicate the backside. So when you talk about dorsal fins on a fish or a shark, you are talking about the fin that extends off of their back. Next two terms are medial and lateral. Medial comes from middle, so when we talk about something being medial, it's more to the center. Lateral is something that is to the sides. So belly button would be positioned medial. Your ears would be lateral. The next two terms that you have, ipsilateral and contralateral. Ipsilateral means that something is positioned on the same side of the body. So right leg, right arm, positioned on the same side of the body. Contralateral is something that is positioned on opposite sides of the body. So your right arm, left arm, they are positioned on opposite sides of the body. Proximal distal, you'll notice that there's a little asterisk there. That indicates that when you talk about proximal and distal, you have to be referencing something on the limbs of the body. Proximal comes from the term proximity, meaning to be close to something. Distal comes from distant, indicating that you are far away from something. So when you talk about proximal, it means that it is closer to the point of attachment. Now remember, we can only use proximal and distal when we're talking about the limbs. So if you think about where the arm attaches to the trunk or the core of your body, the closer you are to the core of your body, the more proximal you are. The closer you get to the fingertips, now you are distal. So if I were to ask you, position-wise, the fingers are, or let me rephrase that. The elbow would be blank compared to the shoulder. It would be distal because the elbow is positioned further away from that point of attachment than the shoulder is. The last two that you guys have there are superficial and deep. Superficial and deep just references how close something is to the surface. And you can be talking about injuries with this, you can be talking about skin layers. Can be used in a variety of different situations, but when we talk about superficial, this means close to the surface. If you are talking about a structure being deep, that means it is more internal. So it's underneath other structures, other tissues. And then another slide there just for those people that are more on the visual side of things. Again, these images you will be able to find in your textbook as well as your workbook. So if you printed this off and it came out black and white, and like I said, you want the colors, feel free to go and take a look in your textbook as well. The last one that we have here is the planes of the body, and the different ways that you can actually divide the body. So if you were trying to look at a specific structure, how you would cut the body in order to be able to see that structure is what we're talking about when we talk about the planes of the body. The first term that you have there is sagittal. Sagittal is going to indicate that you have divided the body into right and left portions. Now, you can have different sagittal cuts. If you have a sagittal cut that is going to divide you into equal parts, then that is a mid-sagittal cut. So it would be going straight down through the nose, straight down through the belly button, down to the floor. That would be a mid-sagittal cut. If it's positioned more to one side of the body than the other, then you would just refer to that as sagittal. Once you use that prefix mid, now we know you're right on that midline. A transverse or horizontal plane is going to cut the body into sections so that you have a superior and an inferior portion. So you have a top portion of the body and you have a bottom. And then the last plane that you guys have, coronal or frontal, this would be a situation where you would cut the body into a front and a back. So you would have a front side, and then you would also have the back half of the body as well. Alright, so that takes us through our first packet. When we get to our first face-to-face meeting, we will have some labs to do that tie into this, and I'll go through the syllabus and make sure that we talk about the format of the class and all of that, but this will help to keep us on pace with where we need to be. So make sure that this, or hopefully this gets completed by the time that we meet on the 18th. Let me know if you have any problems.